Good evening. My name is Melissa Giller, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for the Reagan Foundation. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I know you just sat down, but if you wouldn't mind standing back up, and in honor of our men and women who defend our freedom, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So you may have noticed that this evening's program is promoted as an Architects of Change conversation. This is because Maria Shriver's work is driven by her belief that all of us have the ability to be what she calls architects of change, people who see a problem in their own life or the community around them, then step out of their comfort zone and do what it takes to create the solution. And not many people define this better than our guest tonight, Ann Romney. She had a very happy and successful life, marriage, children, a storybook life. But then, in 1998, she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and was told there was no treatment, that the life that she knew it was over. She refused to accept this. She went on to become a very active First Lady of Massachusetts, a best-selling author, a grandmother of 23, an award-winning equestrian. And on top of all of that, she found time to found the Ann Romney Center for Neurologic Diseases at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, of which she is now their global ambassador. The Ann Romney Center for Neurologic Diseases is a major research center aimed at finding cures and treatments for Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, and other devastating neurological diseases, including Parkinson's and Lou Gehrig's. The center empowers patients, convenes world-renowned scientists, and works to fuel life-giving breakthroughs that will change outcomes for future generations. This remarkable woman truly is the epitome of an architect of change. So who better to talk to Ann about how she's creating solutions and changes for the world than the woman who created the series, Maria Shriver. Maria herself is an architect of change. She has long championed for women's empowerment, economic entrepreneurship, and social justice. She has created programs, issued reports, and produced films, all with the singular goal of advancing women, both personally and professionally. She is also one of the nation's leading advocates for families struggling with Alzheimer's disease, thus making the Ann Romney Center for Neurological Diseases personally important to her as well. So let's get to it. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the Reagan Library, Ann Romney and Maria Shriver.
Wow, look at all these people who came to hear you.
I know, this is awesome.
This is awesome.
Thank you all, thank you.
Thank you all for braving the traffic and coming all this way, and they had to choose to come and listen to you or watch Hillary Clinton, and so,
They're up there too.
I'm not quite sure what to make of all that applause, but I'll just leave it at that. So yeah, look at that. So wonderful. You couldn't come to hear a better woman. So I just want to thank Ann for being here. And I think as she was just saying, truly is an architect of change. And full disclosure, since I'm a journalist, I always like to say full disclosure, we're friends. We've known each other for a long time, and I'm a big admirer of Ann's. And I'm an admirer of her as a woman, as a wife, as a mother, as a grandmother, and certainly now as an advocate for people with MS, but also with people with all neurological diseases, because this is something that particularly affects women in disproportionate numbers. So today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what happens in your life when something happens and how you navigate that and how you change it and how you barrel on through. So she's going to take some of my questions, and then we're going to open it up for questions from the audience, so you'll have a chance to hear some of your own questions answered, I hope. And I hope this is lively, and I hope it's fun, and most importantly, I hope it's inspiring, because I do believe that every single person in this room, up there, down here, and who's watching this on C-SPAN is capable of creating change in our world. And all you have to do is step forward. And sometimes the first step is the most difficult, but everybody here has a voice. Everybody here has a mission and a purpose, and everybody here can make the world, what I say, is better, more conscious, more caring, and compassionate. So thank you for coming to listen to her, and let's begin. So
Okay.
Ann, this book, which we're here, and she's going to sign afterwards, In This Together, is that you and Mitt, or is that all of us?
Good question.
Thank you.
I will start with my diagnosis, and that was in 1998, and we were in the doctor's office, and I knew there was something really seriously wrong with me. And when I went to the doctor's office, there was a pamphlet, and on that pamphlet there were 3 choices for me: ALS, MS, or Parkinson's. And I knew right away that I could narrow it down to ALS or MS. And I knew just sitting in that office and reading the brochures that I had one of those 2. And Mitt and I went into the office together. The doctor performed a lot of tests. He looked at my MRI. And then he told me that I had MS, and he gratefully left the room. That is when Mitt and I cried, and Mitt hugged me. And this is the first thing Mitt said. He said, "It's not terminal. We're going to be okay. We're in this together." And that is the title of the book. But now that I've lived through this experience, and now that I've been on the campaign trail, and I've seen hundreds and thousands of people coming up to me during those times, knowing that they were suffering, they were there for me, I committed then that I would do something for them, and I kept telling them, "I'll be there for you." So I now know that we all have a bag of rocks that we carry in life. And most of the time, no one can see the bag of rocks that's thrown over the back of our shoulder. If we live life long enough, all of us will run into a problem in life where we are brought to our knees. And whether it is with a disease, or with a loss of a loved one, with bankruptcy, with a failed marriage, whatever, there will be a life crisis that all of us will go through. And I wrote this book not just for people that are suffering with MS, but for anyone that's going through a crisis in life where they need help and they need support. And so in one way, yes, Mitt and I were in this together. On the second level, it is we are all in this together. We're traveling this earth together, and I loved how you talked about that, Maria. We need to be more compassionate and caring and recognize that everyone has a bag of rocks, and that we need to be more caring and kind.
You talk about that one of your pastors talked about everybody having a bag of rocks, and that before your MS diagnosis, you really had, in your opinion, a storybook life, that it felt really perfect to you. How would you describe your life today?
I would say that MS has been my cruelest teacher, and the lessons I've learned from having to be in the depths of sorrow, in the depths of despair, feeling hopeless, being depressed, thinking life had no value anymore, thinking that I was worth nothing anymore because I was no good to anybody, because I couldn't even hardly take care of myself. To have come through that, I now can look back and gratefully say that MS was my cruelest teacher, but that I am very grateful that I had that, because it totally changed my vista. I would never have imagined that I'd be doing what I'm doing now. I would never have done that if I hadn't gone through what I'd gone through. I would never have written this book. I would never have started the center. I would never have done all of the things that came from that. So, you know, sometimes you think it's, you're dealt like a pretty bad hand, and then you look back later and you go, well, it was rough. But I got through it, and somehow I'm stronger because of it.
Let's talk a little bit. You just said something I think that's really interesting. You said, I went through these depths of depression and I felt like I was no good, no use to anybody at all. And you write in the book about losing your identity because you were always the kind of center of the family. You did everything, and then when that didn't seem possible, you felt like you didn't know who you were. And I'm sure that there's a lot of people in this audience who've had that experience where there's a loss of identity, if you lose a job, if your marriage falls apart, if something happens to you where the identity that you had built kind of disappears before your very eyes. Talk to me about how low that was and how you built it back up to have a very different identity.
Yeah, it's, you know, I really have to say, in giving it in context, that I went from this very active person that could do everything and really accomplished and really energetic and taking care of everybody and, you know, running everything, and all of a sudden, nothing. Can hardly get out of bed. Can't look at the mail, can't even have the energy to open the envelope, to even try to think about how to even deal with what's inside the envelope. So that huge shift brought about the changes that Maria talked about, which is we all have labels in life. I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a journalist. Whatever it is that we have an identity which says to the world, I'm pretty great, and this is my identity. When that identity is taken from you, where if Maria were that sick, she would not be able to be a journalist anymore. She would just be at home, basically with the covers over her head. When that happens, it's pretty traumatic. And I really felt this was one of the hardest pieces of the book for me to write, because I wanted to get it right. Because I felt like it was so important that I was honest about how tough it is when you go through situations like this. And what it did for me is that it made me feel worthless and of no use, that I would never have another day of joy in my life. And so it was just important that I communicate that and let people know that those others that are maybe suffering will probably go through that same identity crisis. And the wonderful thing, and I will say Mitt was amazing during this period, and he was the biggest help to me, is knowing how upset I was and how down I was. He said something pretty wonderful, and he said, you know, Ann, I don't love you because you make good dinners, which I did. I love you for who you are. And that was like a release for me to say, and it allowed me to be sick. And it allowed me to then, believe it or not, start to heal. Because I had to let it all go. I had to let it all go. What the world thought, who I had built myself into was gone. That person was gone. And now I had to decide what was left inside. And what Mitt saw was pretty wonderful. And I had to get to the depths of despair and to this point. And I have to say, I think my faith also helped me, Maria.
So let me ask you about your faith. But did you know, a lot of people in this room don't have a Mitt.
Right.
Okay. So talk to us for a second about how you said you had to begin to see what he saw. You must have met people along the road who didn't have a Mitt.
Right.
How do you see yourself anew without a Mitt?
Well, and I think that's where maybe you turn to faith and recognizing that, you know, you're valuable and loved and cherished by God at all, whatever else is left, that you are important. And I have to say, now, again, with my perspective, that in God's army are the wounded. And until you're wounded, you won't really understand sympathy and empathy for others, all the hard lessons that you live, and that you are truly loved and cherished by God. So again, you know, I feel like I'm one of the wounded. And from being wounded, I like to say that it broke my heart, but in breaking my heart, it opened my heart for a greater ability to have compassion for others and care for others.
You write in the book that some people suggested to you that perhaps you had gotten MS and it was because you could do something with it. And you said, I didn't subscribe and don't subscribe to that belief.
No, I think...
but you actually have done something with it.
Yes.
You have become an architect of change when it comes to MS because you have stepped up and said, this is what MS looks like. And it doesn't maybe look like that for everybody, but you can continue.
Yeah, it is, again, not something you would welcome, or do I think that God is in heaven saying, you, I'm going to break your heart, and you're going to get sick. And I don't think life is indiscriminate. And life happens, and bad things happen, and we none escape it. And you know, some things, and I felt this was interesting because with the publishers, when they were telling me they wanted to publish the book, and they wanted to do this, and I kept saying, I don't want it to be about me. There's so many more people that have suffered so much more than I have. And they said, no, we want to hear your story. Despite that, I had to include in the book some other stories from people that really have had really rough things happen. And yet, despite that, they did the same thing. They went through the same thing I went through, and like totally give up and hated, they just want to die and all those things. But then the resilience of the human spirit is so extraordinary. The strength that people have that are pushed to the absolute limits is extraordinary. So I had to write about some of those people in this book. And in the abstract form, and this is one person I wish that I had the opportunity to meet, was Nelson Mandela. Because if you look at someone that had such a huge impact on the world, he went into prison an angry black revolutionary. He came out the most loving, forgiving, extraordinary human being. And I wanted to figure out what happens to the human spirit that changes that to that. And that, to me, is what is so wonderful about life, is that we all have that seed within us to be able to have that kind of impact and change and influence. Now, none of us are going to have the impact or influence of a Nelson Mandela. He changed South Africa. He changed the world. He was an example that will always live on. But each one of us can have an influence or an impact for good on the circle that we live in. And, and that's something we can't forget. Mitt, I love how Mitt describes it. Because sometimes we feel as though there's so much suffering in the world, there's so much heartache, and there's so much poverty, and how do you, when we have such abundance, deal with the frustration of feeling like you can't do enough? And I love how Mitt describes it to my children and helps describe it to me too, because he says if you think about it as a football field and everyone's got their 10 yards, and that's where you live, and you're not gonna cure world hunger. One person is not gonna cure world hunger, but in the 10 yards you're living in, you can have huge impact. And it's not like you have to have a life-shattering life that has going to impact the entire world. Only a few people that have ever lived on this earth have been able to do that. But within your 10 yards, you can. And so for me, it's always a decision. If someone happens to come into my life that I know through my children or someone else, that's the person I'm going to help.
And talk a second, you mentioned Nelson Mandela, how he went in and how he came out. Describe yourself on the way in, describe yourself on the way out.
I would say on the way in, self-content, slightly selfish, not a great worldview. On the way out, a broken heart, in an urgency, in a sense of wanting to let people know that are suffering that I understand and that I will, that I want to help and do something and make a difference in the lives. And as Maria knows, we're talking like 50 million lives that are impacted from neurologic disease, and we're not just talking about the patient, we're talking about the caregiver and the loved ones that have to live with the consequence of some of these neurologic diseases.
What do you want this book to do? What do you want to inspire people to do because of your journey?
It's not like I have, grand hopes but
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do.
Well,
you have a
I want a
neurological
cure.
center, and you want to find a cure for like MS and
Yes,
Alzheimer's,
the
me
doctors,
too, Parkinson.
I keep telling them, have you found the cure yet? Come on.
Yeah.
Have you found the cure yet? No, that's not, we know that takes a long time, but I want to be able to have people that are suffering say, this is what happens when you're in despair, and this is where I know that Ann went, and somehow she came out the other end. And I want then to be able to say, I want to give people hope. I want to give people hope.
Do you want them to understand how MS progresses? Do you want them to get concerned about all these neurological diseases and help you raise millions of dollars to find a cure? What impact do you want in this together to make?
Well, we all saw what the Ice Bucket Challenge did, and I bet you most of the people in this room participated in it and may have given $100 or $1,000 to the Ice Bucket Challenge, which is Alzheimer's research.
ALS.
ALS.
Yeah.
Did I say Alzheimer's?
That's okay.
You know what I'm saying. But I may.
They're
I don't
all
know.
in it together, so.
We are.
Yeah.
And with that, one pebble of an event, it spread across the world. Even all my grandchildren did it. I think they raised something like $140 million. They are making, from that one event, such ripple effect has happened. I would hope to have just a fraction of that impact, because it's so hard to always duplicate something like that. But to raise awareness, basically to let people know that for ALS right now, when someone gets that diagnosis, there is nothing a doctor can do except, I'm so sorry, go home. And basically, you will die within more than likely 5 years of a very horrible, slow death. And with Alzheimer's right now, as Maria and I know too well, you get the diagnosis and they send you home and they tell the family that we're really sorry, there's nothing we can do. So for me, I feel as though we are on the threshold of great discovery. And I don't know, Maria, I feel like I want you to talk about this as well. And I want to turn the tables and let you talk about what you know about Alzheimer's research and about where we are at this point, where we have the ability right now to literally have the kind of impact and change in neurosciences that are going to change the lives of millions of people. So,
well, I think what's kind of fun is that, this is a really good example that parties mean nothing. That because both of us are really, she's a Republican, I'm a Democrat or an independent, declined to state, but we both are really committed to finding cures for the diseases that Ann is talking about. And I think particularly my dad died of Alzheimer's, and that these diseases also disproportionately affect women. So a woman in her early 60s is twice as likely to get Alzheimer's as she is to get breast cancer. 70 million Americans are caregiving, as Ann said. So many of them are doing it unpaid, family members. And so one of the things I think that you're also talking about is to get presidential candidates in this election cycle to talk about caregiving, to talk about brain research, to talk about what we can do as a United Nations and a United States of America to focus really on finding cures for these diseases, because I'm sure that you can be running a study to look at Parkinson's and you might find a cure for Alzheimer's, or you might be looking at Alzheimer's and find a cure for MS, or you might find a cure for ALS. So what you're doing with the Ann Romney Center is really saying, look at all of these diseases. we can look at them all together because they affect so many millions of Americans, and not just as those that Ann was saying that are the patients, but their family members, their caregivers, their children. And so that's what I'm so excited to be working with you on, because, you know, while we try to say that there is hope with Alzheimer's, so we try to say, you know, for people to get diagnosed early, there are lots of different clinical trials that are going on, so we try to talk about that there is hope out there, but there's still a lot of fear. Tremendous amount of fear. So even like, I want to come back to you were saying when you went to the doctor's office, you knew something was wrong. So many people know something's wrong, but they're afraid to go to the doctor's office. And you talk a little bit in the book about first like not wanting to go because you too were afraid. So for anybody out there today, why would you advocate that if they feel like something's wrong or they have a parent that they think something's wrong, why should they go? Because there's a lot of exciting things going on, whether it's at the Ann Romney Center and here in California, there's a lot going on in terms of research.
Just as an example of why I got so excited, and at our last board meeting, who Maria's, would that be your nephew? Is Joe Kennedy your?
Well, he's my first cousin once removed.
Okay.
But everybody just like, oh, you know the Kennedys. That's
it's
right.
a Kennedy.
Yeah. See, her husband ran against my uncle, so, and look at this, here we are.
Isn't it great?
That's right, there we are. See?
But this is the other great part. They became great friends after that.
They did. That's right, and healthcare, and they worked together.
They worked together, and they worked together, and they really did work together, and it was an extraordinary thing, and we were so sad when your uncle died, and he died of a brain tumor, an incurable brain tumor. And so part of our study is going to be studying this. But I do want to say that we have an extraordinary group of doctors and researchers at the Ann Romney Center that are studying and are finding very out-of-the-box approaches to some of these neurologic diseases. And they are compounding right now, and it will be available for human trials in 2017, they hope, a nasal vaccine for Alzheimer's. So things are happening.
But we have to really get people focused on it. We've launched, and Ann and I are working together on Wipe Out Alzheimer's, which is the largest global movement of women, to try to study women's brains in particular, because why is this happening? And it's not just because people are living longer, right? It's not just all of a sudden people go, well, you know, Alzheimer's is something that happens to old people. Not so. And, you know, ALS is happening to people in their prime. MS, you are 50 years old.
Right.
50 years old. But let's come back a second to like fear, because fear is, I think everybody can relate to, like, they think something's wrong, but they don't want to go to the doctor, right? Or they're busy, and particularly like, oh, I don't want to go, and I don't want to get that news. What pushed you out of the fear and into the doctor's office, and why would you tell people that that was a good thing?
Well, I was fortunate that I had a brother that's a doctor, and I would describe to him what was going on. And he was so kind during that time, and he finally just said, Ann, you have got to go. Because I, for 2 or 3 months, or maybe even a year, knew something was wrong.
How'd you know?
Well, I would be tripping. My leg went numb. My whole right leg, half of my leg was completely numb, like, you know, like it was completely asleep. And then I started really but the thing that was the real problem was the fatigue. And with MS, people do not appreciate the fatigue that people have with MS. It is unrelenting and unforgiving, and it's just horrible. It completely rules your life. And it is a different kind of fatigue than you even have when you've got a really bad flu and you just can't get out of bed. It's that kind of fatigue that just completely takes hold of your life. And that was the part that I knew I had to figure out. There was something really wrong, and I had to figure out what that was. In a strange way, I was relieved to get the diagnosis, because then I could say there's a label as to why I'm feeling this way. And it was also an excuse to say, no, I can't do that, no, I can't do that.
But your doctor said we're going to, you know, so I think one of the things that, whether it's in Alzheimer's or others, early diagnosis does make you available for certain trials. Doctors do feel like the earlier you get in, the more they can help you. And you talk in here about, like, let's hit it hard.
Early and hard.
Early and hard.
Yeah.
And so that is a reason, if you do suspect something's wrong or you have a loved one who's complaining about some of these things, to have that approach. Get in early and hit it hard.
Right.
So you write also in the book that you talk about, you know, how debilitating this disease was, and yet you said, let's go run for president, which is usually debilitating.
Right.
So,
so the prescription when you have MS is don't over-fatigue yourself, have a normal schedule, eat healthy, exercise. When you're in a presidential campaign, I remember once getting like dinner out of the vending machine. And,
only once?
Oh, well, more than once. I mean, you just are hungry a lot and then you just eat anything. It's just awful. But you have no routine, you're exhausted, you're traveling all the time. When I was first diagnosed, I couldn't, the possibility of even getting on an airplane was more than I could not do it. There was no way I could have done that in those first 3 or 4 years. So the fact that I did that in the presidential is actually miraculous, that I was able to have the strength and the stamina to do that. Now, I still fatigued more quickly than most, and I still had to watch it, but I had learned how to manage myself at that point, and I am so grateful that I am one of the very, very few that have been in remission for a very long time, and I'm so grateful for that. So.
I think it's important to explain, because when I was showing this book to my daughter, she's like, she doesn't look sick. And she's beautiful. She doesn't look sick. So talk about that, because I think that there are 2 different kinds of MS
right.
as you go through in the book. And I have known other people who have MS who are incapacitated and do end up in a
right.
wheelchair. So how have you been able to look like this and to be in remission? So I think that's important to explain.
That is why I've been, a lot of blood is being drawn from me and a lot of MRIs are being done on me, because everyone wants to know why is Ann doing so well, including Dr. Weiner, who is the co-director of the Ann Romney Center for Neurological Diseases. I am in something called the CLIMB study, which is Harvard Medical School, and there's like 2,500 patients that we are following very carefully and monitoring. And it'll be a little bit like the nurses study that was done for heart, the Framingham study. It's the same idea. And with those patients, as you might imagine, the 2,500 or so that Dr. Weiner is tracking, there are varying degrees of what we would say disability. And I am one of the few that are doing as well as you can see that I'm doing.
But what do you attribute that to?
I don't know. I don't know why I'm doing so well.
You talk about horses, you talk about reflexology, you talk about alternative.
All of that, and I can say that even someone with MS could do all of that, and they wouldn't necessarily do as well as I did. So there's a lot of mystery to this still. The treatments for Tysabri is a great drug for MS. It works for some people, not others. Copaxone works for some, not others. There's so many things we don't understand. And then there's this other really sad thing about MS. You have relapsing remitting, or you have progressive. With progressive MS, in the past, very few drugs would have any impact, and that's where people get much weaker and weaker, and then they're in the wheelchair, and then they're in bed, and then it's just downhill, downhill, downhill. Relapsing remitting, you have an attack, you go down a little bit, you recover a little bit, you go back down a little bit, you recover a little bit. And you go down enough over time and enough attacks that you actually lose, and you see people with a walker or with a cane, and those are people that probably are having relapsing remitting, but they've been having MS for a long period of time. What we're doing now with drugs is we're finding that we want to reduce the frequency of the attacks and the duration of the attacks. And that's working, but it's the genome project that have made the biggest difference, where we're finding out and we will be able to take someone's blood and say, this drug's going to work for you, this one's not. And that's where we are right now with the research. Finding a cure and all of those things, it's much further away. But we are really refining, and I have to say that's why, Maria, I'm hopeful about Alzheimer's, is that the diagnostic tools that are now available are so sophisticated. The MRI imaging, we are able to look into the brain and see function that we were never able to see before, and understand, and Dr. Selko, who's co-director of, was someone that figured out that amyloid plaque developed on the brain of Alzheimer's patients maybe as early as 20 years before their first symptom. So, you just take it one step at a time, and then you figure out, how do we break up the amyloid plaque, and does that even make a difference? And now they're finding it does. So there was this great study that just came out, I know you know, from Switzerland, that found that it is working, that some of these drugs are breaking up that amyloid plaque. So, there is such a wide open field and so much potential for these neurologic diseases, and the reason it's going to become more hopeful is because of the diagnostic tools that we are now able to study the brain in such a way that we've never been able to before.
So if you have children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews, encourage them to go into neuroscience, particularly seriously, because this is, to make it a field that's attractive, that has all the bright young minds going into it, because there is a lot of hope if we put the best and the brightest to focus on this, because I always said that, if we can land a man on the moon, we can certainly get a woman in the brain and figure it out and, solve a lot of these diseases. I always say, they were trying to figure out some, I think it was some nasal problem, and they discovered Botox, right? And that's several billion-dollar industry. People trip over cures if really smart people are in this field. So I think it's really in great area to actually encourage people to go into neuroscience, because there are so many diseases in the brain, and it affects so many millions and millions of people. And if we get bright young people to make this their priority, we will find the cures that you're talking about. Let's talk just a second. As we are sitting here, there is a political debate going on, and I was interested that just the other day I saw you come to Hillary Clinton's defense, which I thought was really interesting and great, when you were talking about how difficult people were talking about the fact that she's not likable, she's not trustworthy, and you were saying, you know what it's like to be in that situation, and that you felt that that was really unfair. Talk a little bit about why you felt that was important.
Yeah. Well, I happen to think also, Maria, that sometimes women really get, don't you think they get a little bit tougher scrutiny?
Yeah, well, because we're like their hair, their clothes, what they're doing. And it's I think certainly it's more challenging as to what we look for in a leader as a woman. And what is feminine? What does feminine leadership look like? What does feminine power look like? I hear it over and over again. Well, that's not ladylike. I don't think a woman should be doing that. We hear things all the time. I was reading a basketball player said yesterday, I don't think a woman should be president. She's too emotional. They're too emotional. So there's a lot of, whether you're and we have a Republican woman running and a Democratic woman running. So why did you think it was important to come to her defense?
I just thought that so much of it is so unfair and cruel, really. And if you really look at what politics is about, it's improving, what it should be about is making people's lives better. And if that's why we're motivated to be involved in politics, why is it that we have to beat everybody up so much and just decimate them?
Did you feel like that happened to you? And your husband?
It was kind of interesting. I mean, we knew it was going to happen, and so it wasn't like it was a shock. And you just sort of took that as part of what you had to go through. So for us, it was never I never got that upset about it, which is kind of amazing. I felt as though, I just knew it was going to happen. Our political system now is gotten to the point where people are not talking in Washington. the agendas are always going to be, we can't let that side, either the Republican or the Democratic side, win, because they get a win, and we can't let that happen. Instead of saying what's best for the American people, and saying there has to be some point where we agree on something. So I think, along with many Americans, I feel the same disenfranchisement from the politicians that do not respond to the best will of the people. That special interests are ruling, big money is ruling, whatever it is, corporations are having the biggest impact on Washington, but not the citizens. And I think that frustration is spilling out into the political arena right now, as we see, is what's going on.
What do you think's going on? Do you sit there and watch the Republican debates? Are you and your
I watch
husband
them.
one of the 24 million
I
tuning
am.
in?
I'm watching them.
You are.
And I will go home and watch this one as well.
Is your mouth on the floor at all in the watching any of the Republican debates?
I think I'm, having participated in 2 elections, presidential election cycles, and participated in where I was at the debates. I think Mitt had like 23 debates in the last cycle, and on just the Republican debates, not the general election ones. I think I am kind of amazed at what's going on.
Can you elaborate? Can you tell me more what that means? You're kind of amazed at what?
Well,
what exactly are you amazed at?
You know, I will say that the fact that more people are watching is a good thing. The fact that people are disparaging of ethnic groups or women or whatever is not a good thing. And so for me, it's like, again, it's important to me to have civility, because civility brings conversation. Civility brings the ability to deal with one another and to respect one another. And you cannot work with someone if you do not respect them and you're not civil with them. And so if we expect our leaders to be good leaders, how can we have someone that is calling people bad names be the leader of the free world that's got to deal with Putin? How is that going to work?
So would you find yourself challenged if a certain person who was calling people names became the Republican nominee? Would you find yourself challenged voting for that person?
It would give me pause.
So is that undecided, or is that, what is that?
That is, this is a long election process, and I trust the American people that at the end of the day, we will get to a person, and whatever that is, whether on the Democratic or the Republican side, there will be people that we believe will be able to be the head of the free world, that will be able then to be a true leader, which in true leadership, you have to be able to communicate and be respectful and have dialogue that will lead to some conclusion that will be positive. And you just can't get there any other way.
That's a political answer. Just as you said, you've been through 2 presidential campaigns. Give people a sense of what the families of those candidates are going through right now.
If any of you had the opportunity to see the Mitt movie, you'll know that was done by Netflix. And it really is behind the scenes, and it's not political. By the way, you never see strategy meetings or anything like that, because, by the way, they would never let him in. And so Greg Whiteley did this film, and it really is a behind the scenes, what it's like on the family. And Maria, you know, Maria knows, the 2 of us sitting up here really do know how hard it is on the families, and we love our families, and we see them being criticized and, maligned, and it's hard. And we become defensive, and I'm like a she lion when it comes to my husband. So it some ways, I think it was harder for me than it honestly was for Mitt to be going through it, because I wanted to always be defending him and being his advocate in every way. as he is always mine. So, you know, it's, but on the other hand, I have to say, what an amazing experience. You having been involved in politics, you know what it's like. You get to meet people, you get to see what's going on in the country, you're there with the pulse of what's happening. And when you're out and you're in Iowa and you're in all these small towns, and then you go to New Hampshire and you're all those small towns and you're talking to people all the time, then you go to South Carolina, then you go to California, then you go to Michigan, then you go to Ohio, you're talking to people all the time. And it is very energizing on that level where you really come away with an appreciation for our liberties, our freedoms, our extraordinary citizens that really love this country and love the principles of democracy and freedom. And you come away energized from it, and it's an extraordinary experience. So I always say there's the good and the bad, as there is in everything in life. And a political campaign, it is so strenuous and so difficult, and it stretches you to the limit. Really every day, it stretches you to the limit. And but from that as well, anything that's hard in life, you learn from and you grow from, and hopefully, you know, that's where I feel as though in the end, it was always just a positive thing that we went through it.
I always used to say that I think every young person should be required to work in a political campaign, because it's where you actually see the country. It's where you see and meet people from different parties and different beliefs, because we've become really so segregated, right? We watch the channel you want to watch where your kind of political opinions can be reinforced. You live in a neighborhood maybe where people all think the same as you, but when you get out there and you start campaigning and you have to meet people of different political persuasions, it really does give you a different understanding of the country. Knowing that and watching this campaign, like, God, we should be in there. Gosh, we should be in there. I mean, especially when you see the discourse and you see what's happening in the Republican Party.
It is tempting. It's like,
there's still time.
Step aside, Mitt, get in there.
Really?
I feel
Do
that
you think
sometimes,
that?
but
Yeah.
it's not. I mean, we made that decision in January. We thought about it for 20 seconds, and then
why did you say no?
You know, Maria, again, this is so interesting, and we had no idea what was coming. Obviously, no one did. How tumultuous this process was going to be. But it was just my gut and Mitt's gut just didn't feel right. We just didn't have that feeling that we should do it.
And you had that feeling the other two times.
We definitely had that feeling the other two times. And you have to have that. You have to have that. Otherwise, you would never be able to sustain the difficulty that you have to go through every single day.
So I was just interviewing a young woman last week named Elizabeth Holmes, who has started a company called Theranos, which is a blood diagnostic company. And many of the people were saying, the young people who are going into business, saying that is the place today to change the world. Politics no longer is the place to create change, to create impact, that it's in business. And I was saying that kind of when I was growing up, if you wanted to change the world or create any change, you went into politics. And now people say, forget it. You can't get anything accomplished in politics. You have to go into business. What do you think of that?
You know, I would say right now, I would think that's I kind of agree with that, because what is happening in Washington is such stagnation there. Mm-hmm. And it's got to be frustrating for those that are serving, because I know everyone's very frustrated with them, but they're trying to get things done too, and they can't either. So I think for me, again, I feel so content right now and so happy to know that Mitt and I are going to be making an impact in ways that are going to be meaningful and life-altering and really significant, but is not necessarily going to be in the political arena.
So we would have looked maybe to politics or the government to fund a lot of this research, and that's why I think that you're going around the country. The proceeds of this book are actually going to the Ann Romney Center. going around trying to raise a lot of money so that many of these trials, which cost a fortune, right, doctors can be funded to create these trials.
Right.
And that's a big part of what you're trying to do, is not only talk about them, but also raise money so that doctors have the funds to do the trials.
Yeah, and maybe a lot of you already understand this, but you know, a lot of the research done in this country is done by the NIH. And NIH dollars have been shrinking along with all other dollars in this country have been shrinking. But if you want to do, for instance, in our center, if we want to do something really experimental that is a little bit outside the box, for instance, there's an ALS drug trial we're doing, there's this nasal vaccine. The NIH is not going to fund that until it's up and running and they kind of see that it's working. So if you want to seed the really brilliant breakthroughs, it's going to have to come from philanthropic dollars. Mm-hmm. And that is something that I think is really important for people to understand, that the real breakthroughs, I think, are going to come from citizens, you know, getting behind and helping support some of these research. The philanthropic dollars have become more and more important because of that, because the NIH dollars are shrinking, and because anything that's new is going to first have to come from philanthropy.
And when I look at what the political campaigns are raising to run for office, over $1 billion, I think of what we could do with $1 billion.
Me too, Maria.
I know. So what are we doing? We got to get going.
That.
So anyway, Melissa has some questions. People wrote down questions for Ann Romney here. So she's going to come up and read them because I can't read anything.
I have to just make a comment about that. I have to say it was much easier to raise political dollars than it has been to raise research dollars.
Okay, so this is something we can begin to change right now. You're inspiring us that we're going to start raising some research dollars. And Ann and I were talking, I said to her, like Bush and Clinton went out and raised all this money in a bipartisan way for disaster relief. You and I are going to have to crisscross the world and raise this money bipartisan for brain research and philanthropic dollars so that we can find cures to these diseases. Okay, so here are the questions.
Yeah, so we have time for just a few questions, and I'm going to start with one that's for both of you. As a woman of the 21st century, what do you believe is the most important attribute our generation of women can leave America?
Can do what?
Can leave America.
Can leave America?
Yes.
A cure for Alzheimer's, but no, I think feminine leadership is incredibly important. I think one of the things I learned from my mother and my grandmother, and this is something you wrote about for our website this past week, that raising a child and investing your energy and emotion and time is perhaps one of the greatest gifts that we can leave this country. I think one of the, and this is, Ann wrote an incredible piece for MariaShriver.com about how she saw her role as a stay-at-home mom to be as important as the work that her husband was doing outside of the home. And it created, I should say, even in 2015, quite a discussion about that. And I'm hoping that women who step forward as architects of change, that we can just put that discussion to rest, that women no longer need to be like debating that amongst each other. And we need to see value in everybody's role and in everybody's choices and not judge them. And I think we don't need a bag of rocks before we become empathetic to people's choices. So I think one of the greatest things, for me anyway, that I'm hoping to leave is 4 nice, kind, well-adjusted children. She's got so many children.
I've got 23 grandchildren. So
I have none. I
have a lot of work to do. I feel like I was a really good mother in that my boys now are really just wonderful adult men. So I feel like that work
That's a big accomplishment.
I think that is, but you know, I think it is so important that, you know, that we always talk about male, about female, about whatever, that we are all better off if women have something that I think is unique, and that is the ability to bear children. By having that experience of loving a child after you give birth to it, there is something that is quite feminine about that love. And, you know, I think we can't lose sight of the fact that we have, because of that gift that we have a unique ability to love and care. And I think we have, as women, can have a huge impact on the world through that God-given quality of truly loving, you know, the children that come in. And it's sort of a special thing. And you know, we lose track so many times with saying the feminist movement, and that means you have to be in business, you have to be aggressive. Well, I don't agree with that. I don't think that's, you know, we can't forget that I believe our basic nature is loving and kind, and if we want to have a huge impact on the world, we have to develop that.
I agree with that, and the Pope was talking about beginning to institute a culture of care in our world. And I loved that, because I think that we can institute a culture of care in our homes, in our businesses, to care about employees who are taking care of parents, care about employees who are taking care of in-laws or sick members of their family or parenting, that if we just kind of really leave or begin to talk about a culture of care, of compassion, of being conscious about the world that we live in, I think that's an extension of what the Pope was talking about, and I think what you're talking about as well.
So we've been talking about family, so we'll go next to a fun question someone asked to Ann. How in the world do you manage 23 grandchildren?
Not very well. We all get together this summer, and we are all under one roof, and you figure out, okay, I have 5 sons, 5 daughters-in-law, 23 grandchildren, and that means breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and there are a lot of babies, and there's a lot of chaos. But, you know, we really make an effort, Mitt and I do, to think about that and to think about things that we want to teach them and principles that we want them to have. And so we structure things in such a way that we will have discussions or family councils or different things, and the children and even my grandchildren know what's important to Mitt and I. And obviously that's their parents as well, but we find that that's a wonderful opportunity when we're all there together to reemphasize the fact that we want to be servants, that we want to help one another, that we want to participate in, you know, helping those that are less privileged, or, you know, that becomes something that is important to us, and we want then for our children and our grandchildren to understand that is a value that we have as a family. Mitt's father, George Romney, was friends with the Shrivers, with Sarge Shriver,
yes,
and your dad. They were very good friends. And both of those men, I believe, have had a ripple effect through generations, because they were extraordinary human beings that stepped outside of themselves. Sarge did the Peace Corps. George Romney was president of American Motors, then was governor of Michigan, then he ran in 1968 for president, lost to Richard Nixon in the primary.
My dad lost to Richard Nixon, too. Glad we're not at the Nixon Library.
That's interesting. We can talk about that. But then, I didn't even know about that.
Yeah.
Then he went on
really badly, too, by the way.
And started something called Volunteer America. And so we saw that was a powerful thing in my life, and I'm sure your dad was a powerful impact in your life. We saw service firsthand, and people that we knew and loved stepping outside of themselves and doing things. And there is not a prayer that Mitt would have ever even considered politics if he hadn't seen his father, George, do it. So I think there's
And
always...
his mother, right?
Lenore, too. She ran for Senate. So I think there's legacy that is important. And so thank you for that question, because I think our legacy is, I want it to be that our grandchildren know that we serve others and help others.
But I also think on your Facebook page, I saw the annual family talent show, so a lot of fun there, too.
We have fun, too.
So I think this is going to be the last question. Sorry, there's a lot here, but we're running out of time. My niece was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when she was 6 years old. Oh. Today at 18, she's now a freshman in college. Is there anything that she might be able to take away from your living with MS that might inspire her when she is in the hospital getting treated for her episodes?
Oh, that is so, 6 years old. I know, I have another really good friend who has a child with the same. And, you know, that's really, really hard when you see small children. And I think for her to know that in her lifetime, there will be more and better and more progressive and aggressive treatments where is it a girl?
Yes.
That she will live in a place where not only will she have fewer attacks, but we're on the threshold of this nerve regeneration where people that you know, have spinal cord injuries and all those, there are things happening that are so exciting. I wish you could all be in the meetings that I'm in, and I'm sure, Maria, you too, where you see what's coming and these brilliant engineers and scientists that are working to make and improve people's lives so that even if she does lose some function, that there's hope, again, with regeneration of cells and treating not only just the symptoms, but getting to the point where your function is going to be better, and that's the future.
Do you still feel like you're carrying a bag of rocks?
I feel as though my bag of rocks has been made so much lighter by all the people that I know came up to me all the time and said, I'm praying for you, I'm with you, we love you. It was so extraordinary to have that experience of going across the country and having that kind of response.
Has this given you a sense of purpose that perhaps you didn't have? You've stepped up to become a spokesperson, an advocate. You're out talking about something you never imagined
I never
you'd be
thought.
out talking. So has it given you an advocacy that is empowering to you?
Yeah, I mean, it gives you purpose. I mean, it's wonderful, and you just want to help. And you know, there's a lot of people that can pull the wagon. So I will suggest that if people would think about buying this book, we will sign it just right after this. And my proceeds go directly to research, not to buildings or anything else, directly to research. And we are going to make a difference in millions of people's lives through that.
So I want to, that is a perfect segue to wrapping up this conversation with Ann Romney. As she just mentioned, she's going to be in there signing books. The proceeds of this book do go to research. There's a lot of exciting things going on in MS, in Alzheimer's. We hope you will join us both to find a cure for these diseases, and by supporting her center, you do that. And we're going to have more of these Architect of Change conversations, so let us know who you think would be interesting to hear from, and to remember that she was saying you weren't talking about this until it happened to you, and you could have stayed under the covers. You could have rolled over and said, I'm not going to step up, I'm not going to speak up. And every single person, as I started this conversation by saying, has the power within them to speak up on something that can change another person's life. And I hope you will think about that when you leave today, about your own voice and your own power, and take a page from her, be inspired by her, informed by her, and ignited in your own life. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.